Okay, I think we'll get started. It's right at 11 o'clock now. Um, Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Ryan Dendo. I'm the 2021 president of the Georgia chapter. And I'm really excited about our program today. This is the first chapter meeting we've had this year. We've got Mr. Blaine Strickland, who is an instructor, multi-generational CCIM as well, and we've got some really interesting concepts that are going to be coming from him today. First off, I would like to thank our sponsors, especially our platinum sponsors. It's BB&T Grandbridge, Marcus and Millichap, the Simpson Company, Car Rigs and Ingram, and JWB Realty. Thanks for all that you do, our wonderful sponsors. A few announcements quickly before we get started. We, as a chapter, held our first in-person class in February. It was a 101 class. We had about 10 folks come in, and it went very well. So we're going to be doing another one, our 102 class, May 3rd through the 6th, and that will be in person as well at the Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtors building. So please put that on your calendars if you know anybody that is interested in taking the 102 class. Our new website has been launched. Please check that out when you get a second. And then we have also kicked off our mentorship program for 2021. We have some fantastic mentees and mentors who are well-versed on both sides of that program. So we are really excited about that. That's led by our very own Vice President, Kenesha Rubnay, who is doing a fantastic job. We have a Foundations of Real Estate class coming up April 12th through the 13th in partnership with the DeKalb Board of Realtors. It will be at their building as well. So great class there. And then also, finally, we will be holding our spring comprehensive exam at the Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtors building again, May 14th. And we will have 4 weekly study sessions starting a month prior, April 13th. That will go through each class or a recap of each class each week. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce our moderator / interviewer, Mr. Ron Rates of Atlanta Deferred Exchange. He is a sponsor of the Georgia chapter, a qualified intermediary, and he is the go-to man for all things 1031 exchange related. Ron, if you would tell us a little bit about your company, what you do, and then we can get into the program with Blaine.
Sure, Ryan. Thank you. We've been around since 1993. I founded Atlanta Deferred Exchange at that point in time, and a CCIM since 1996. So most people in the CCIM community associate me with 1031, even though I started as a real estate broker in 1981. So I kind of come from the roots of the brokerage side. We are the largest qualified intermediary in Georgia. We do transactions all across the United States. And I think you said it the best, anything 1031, that's what we do. I train tax attorneys and CPAs and write nationally, even in some tax journals on 1031. So the buck kind of stops here, generally speaking, on questions and things that come up. And there's a lot of strategies and things that people aren't aware of. So we try to, through our newsletter and other things like that, educate everyone in regards to what they might be able to offer their clients or even for themselves from an investing standpoint to maximize their benefits and just do what Congress says you can do. And that's all we help people do, is just navigate that road. So anytime you have a 1031 question, even if you're working with a different service provider, you're just not comfortable with a particular situation, give us a call. 90% of the time, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. 10% of the time, maybe there's some additional questioning, but we're more than happy to be a resource and appreciate the opportunity to participate today. So with that said, do you want me to just go right into it, Ryan?
Yes, please. That'd be great. Thanks, Ron.
Great. Well, I've got the good fortune of interacting, I guess that's the kind of an interview methodology with our speaker today, Blaine Strickland. As Ryan indicated, he is not new to commercial real estate, and he's been a previous author, besides the book that we're going to be talking about today. He wrote a book, I think, entitled Thrive, 10 Prescriptions for Exceptional Performance as a Commercial Real Estate Agent. That was a bestseller in 2018. And I think he did some additional reflection after that book. Thrive seems to be a very, very proactive term and name. Now he's just released a book called Adapt. So somehow I think to thrive, maybe there's going to need to be some adapting going on. So welcome, Blaine. Glad to have you on board.
And thanks, Ron. I appreciate the introduction.
Yeah. So he has a very deep family and personal connection to commercial brokerage and to CCIM. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about you and your family's involvement with commercial real estate?
Okay. Well, let's see. My father was an Air Force pilot, and he retired from the Air Force at age 44 because we were stationed at that time at MacDill Air Force Base. And I think he felt like it doesn't get any better than this. We're in Florida, things are happening. And he went into the real estate business in the late 1970s. And by 1984, he was a CCIM designee. I had in the interim transferred to the University of Florida so that I could study real estate. There weren't very many real estate programs back in those days. And so Florida had a program. And since my father was going into real estate, I thought, well, that's what I'll do. And despite getting undergraduate and graduate degrees in real estate from the University of Florida, by 1987, I was a designee. I've always believed that the information that I gained from the CCIM program has been extremely valuable to me. And I wouldn't say this out loud, but potentially more valuable than the master's degree, simply because it's so practical and so applicable. So many years go by. My wife and I have been married a long time. We have 2 children. The second child is a son, Hunter, and Hunter graduated from the University of Central Florida a few years ago, wandered a little bit, and then decided to go in the commercial real estate business. And I think 2 years ago, in 2018, he became a designee. So my father, myself, and my son are a 3-generation designee family. My dad's doing great. He's 88 and he lives out in Colorado Springs. And so we occasionally get the whole gang together and talk about real estate.
Yeah, I can imagine. Maybe there's a bunching up of one group in one room talking real estate, and everyone else kind of going the other direction.
Yeah, they politely listen. And
yeah. Yes, I understand. My wife also has a real estate background, so we have been guilty of that same thing at times with our kids. So one thing to point out to those that are participating, and I see we have almost 50 or more already participating. There is a Q&A function on the Zoom. I'm not sure where you're seeing it. I'm seeing it on the bottom right-hand menu bar. So if you do have questions, please type in questions. Katie will let me know that a question has come up, and I'll go ahead and ask that question to Blaine as soon as it's possible. So this is kind of an interactive interview. It's not Blaine teaching us something and speaking for a 45-minute period of time. This is more of just a friendly chat. We're all in the same business, kind of in the same boat, but maybe he's given a little additional consideration and contemplation as it relates to what's going on in the rest of the business world, and maybe how that's going to creep over into commercial brokerage, and in a way that maybe there's some adjustments that we should consider. So before we kind of get into the main part of the message, Blaine, I'm just going to tee this up. What, in your opinion, would you like to see as the outcome of your message today? When people are leaving, if there was a takeaway that you think is the most important potential takeaway, what do you think that's going to be?
well, the purpose of this book was really to start a conversation, where Thrive, written 3 or 4 years ago, was me using my experience to say, hey, I don't see a lot of coaching out there. I think these tactics would be good for you. If you recognize these challenges, perhaps the prescription that I'm proposing will work for you. So the subtitle of Thrive is 10 Prescriptions for Exceptional Performance, which is me offering experience to you. And I probably could teach when you write a book called Adapt, Disruption is Coming, Are You Ready? It's very hard to claim any control of the future or any special sense of what the trends might be. I did give a lot of thought to the ideas that I present in Adapt, but it's kind of like when you work all weekend on a spreadsheet for a discounted cash flow analysis, the one thing you know for sure is that won't happen because of all the assumptions that you have to make and embed. So what I tried to do in Adapt was identify factors that all of us could talk about and think through whether we feel that those are A, going to happen, and B, how applicable they will be to us. So the purpose of today's time together, and the reason that I felt so strongly about doing it in an interview format, was to really start the conversation. Some of these ideas won't make sense to you, or they won't be very applicable to you. Others will be, wow, I never thought about that. And so the ability to open our minds to possibilities and consider options that might be out in front of us is really the takeaway from today's time together.
Excellent. So, much of commercial real estate practice and even residential brokerage really has stayed somewhat the same. Compensation and practices for golly. I mean, some things have changed in a very small way, but probably for over 100 years. And what you're suggesting now is, okay, maybe in a sense we have this bubble that we think we've been kind of protected, and things should stay the same because of certain types of barriers to entry, but maybe that's not going to be the case, and let's not be surprised, and maybe we can adjust as we see these changes that you're going to sensitize us to position ourselves to still kind of be in the sweet spot of thriving in our own practices, but adapting at the same time. And there's so many instances out there. I think of Eastman Kodak, I think of Polaroid, I think of a number of companies that just owned the marketplace, dominated the marketplace, that are no longer with us because while they were a good company, they just really didn't adapt. And so I think this is right on point. So, one of the things you outline in the book are certain sets of primary influencers, maybe I should call it, as far as what's going to impact change, or things to look at that these are the kind of touch points that might be the buttons that are going to get pushed to make this change happen. So you've got some themes. Do you want to kind of maybe talk about that just a little bit as far as what are kind of these categories that you think are going to, present potentially this change?
Sure. I would say, reaching back to your comment about things have been the same for a long time, I think one of the factors that potentially causes that is that in the commercial real estate brokerage arena in particular, SIOR, CCIM, NAR have estimated that the average age of the commercial real estate agent is 60 years old. And so if you just try to think about how you would assemble a group of that age, you'd have to probably go to senior housing. In other words, if you had a bunch of people that were 60 years old and maybe some that were 80 and some that were 40, then you'd have an average age of 60. But you certainly don't have a preponderance of people that are between 25 and 50. Or if you did, you'd have to have people that were 120 years old to average out at 60 years old. So in effect, perhaps one of the biggest influences that sets the stage for this disruption is the fact that it's primarily populated by people who have been doing it the same way for a long time. So you could make the case, I think, that disruption is coming. Disruption comes all the time. We can't stop it. What maybe changes it, maybe we can use the word disruption rather than adapting or morphing or changing or transforming, but disruption, which seems more violent in a way. In fact, some people have used the phrase creative destruction as a synonym for for disruption. Creative destruction is a synonym for disruption. And the point of that is that I think the time has really come where things just can't wait any longer. I think the change is inevitable, and it's, pounding down on us here. In terms of the themes of the book, I think, well, first of all, I think many of our listeners have read the book. That was the way we set this up, is that you could get a book if you signed up for this. Perfect timing. It's been out there for a year, so people are generally exposed to it. But I would make a couple of comments about the themes. First, in the introduction, I state that there are a couple of things that I do not address. I do not address economic recession, because that affects everybody. I don't address technology directly, because that affects all of us. In other words, it doesn't matter what part of the economy you're in, you're going to be driving an electric car 5-10 years from now. If we have a recession, it affects everybody. So I tried to focus in on the changes that I saw coming that were essentially unique or particular to our arena. And so as a result, there's sort of three groupings there. The first is the evolution of the client. In other words, we could be pulled into disruption by a changing client. The second grouping, if you will, is what I call playground of the giants. Our industry is dominated by some very, very large players. It's no secret that CBRE, followed by JLL, followed by Cushman Wakefield, are the dominant players that produce commissions in the commercial real estate arena now. In Adapt, I estimate that there are 8,800 agents in those three companies that earn about 50% of all the commissions. So if that's true, and then you multiply that by the fact that all three of those are 100 years old or older. So just think about how many 100-year-old companies there are and what has to happen for a company to be 100 years old. So it's just a unique situation where you're saying, like, wow, we're dominated by three companies that earn 50% of the commissions, and they're all old line companies. So, and there are some other giants. You can't say the word giant these days without thinking about Amazon. And so we talk about that. And then in the third.
And to that point, before you go to the third one, we actually have a question that came in from Denis and Atride. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. It says, you mentioned in the book that everyone must have an Amazon strategy. That's what you were just talking about, was Amazon. Can you expound on your thoughts as how a commercial broker might create an Amazon strategy?
Sure. I mentioned that in I write a chapter about Amazon, and I state that I was in this large tech gathering, and a guy stands up from Prologis, and he has some high title. He's a smart, very smart guy. And he says, look, we're the largest industrial landlord in the country. Our largest tenant is Amazon. And what I'm telling all of you in this room, no matter what you're thinking about, where you come from, what your job is, you must have an Amazon strategy. And I thought, well, sure, I get that. I mean, if you're building or you're the tenant next door or whatever, you got to think about that. But when you start to think about how that actually impacts you, then there's some things that you could start to think about. Just let me give you 2 or 3 quick ideas. So one of the things I do is sell a book. Well, I'm dependent on Amazon to conduct that process for me. And so just in the delivery of a message, I'm thinking about the way that Amazon works. I tell a story in the book about how Amazon Locker, the presence of an Amazon Locker, has changed traffic patterns at commercial real estate. So as an example, if you thought that you were going to lease a shopping center, as an example, would you say to the owner of the shopping center, I think we should do what we have to do to get an Amazon Locker on this property because it draws people all day long? In other words, it's one of the most magnetic uses of space that there is. Here's another thought that you're going to have to think about. So all of these multifamily properties have to deal with all these Amazon deliveries. So, 5 years ago, the guy delivered it to the door. That didn't work. Then they started putting it in the management office, but that didn't work. So they built a separate space. That didn't work. And so how are you as a multifamily player going to handle the influx of packages that come in? And what happens if they're time sensitive, like food? What if Amazon, Whole Foods delivers your dinner in a bag and it's sitting at your garage? How are you going to handle that from a commercial real estate perspective? Amazon has gone into the residential real estate world and said, if you will use this residential real estate broker, then you will be awarded with a $500 Amazon gift card. So what if your service provider said, if you will work with us, you'll get an Amazon gift or gift card or credit or whatever it might be. Maybe a homeowner might say, oh, I would love a $500 gift card. I can do all these things. Maybe a user would say, what? I get 3 free months on Amazon Web Services? So there's a lot of influence there, just in the smallest sort of unforeseen ways. Also, they're the largest user of commercial real estate on the planet. So it doesn't matter at what level you look, it won't take long until you bump into Amazon.
And as we know, more and more, the younger generation is getting older. They're going to be our primary customer. And obviously they use the web, Google or whatever their browser is to look up things. What if you have some kind of relationship with Amazon, they make sure you have higher rankings, as far as the search engine optimization is concerned. I could see how that could, I could definitely see that.
Well, I have a coaching client who's trying to build up more traction in his social media. And so this is no secret whatsoever, but there are search engines that provide data. So as an example, if you're trying to decide, I wonder whether I should do this month's post about 1031 exchanges or subleases, you can check the traction of those ideas and then in other words, you can run around in front of the train that's already left the station. Why would I write about subleases when I can see that 7 times more people have typed in 1031 exchange in the last 6 days or 6 hours? So the interaction with Amazon produces results in all ways. Let me just wrap up real quick and say the third grouping in the book.
Yeah.
The third grouping in the book is so the first one is what happens when our clients evolve. The second is playground of the giants. And the third is what about these changing demographics? How long will these 60-year-olds stay? And what happens if they all age out at once? What happens if they change their minds and decide to focus more on their own ownership? Most of them are not particularly interested in taking on assistants and trainees, et cetera, because there's not enough runway left for them. They're not really looking to develop a junior partner at age 60, maybe 55, 60, 65. It's just really interesting when you get to that stage. The other piece of that, of course, is that young people have in some ways more opportunity to participate in the industry other than brokerage. So a smart young person may say, well, I see brokerage, but I see other options as well. So that's the 3 groupings: the client, the changing client, what happens with the big boys, and what happens internally with all us girls, the changing demographic of our arena.
So I've got a question about client evolution and maybe transparency. To some degree, I know for our clientele, it's still generally speaking 50 and above. I mean, that's so, as far as spending money and making big financial commitments, I can imagine, at least with commercial real estate, that's going to vary across the country. In Silicon Valley, it might be a lot younger as far as who's making that decision versus where we're at. But in talking about, adapting, I know we as a company have tried to do a number of things from electronic signatures to others. And, while it looks on paper that should be a lot easier, our clientele it hasn't really adapted to that type of technology yet. So how do you see, it's a very, here's what can happen, here is where it's happening in certain areas, but here we have commercial real estate and whoever our clientele is. So, what are your thoughts as it relates to, you've got language barriers, you have cultural barriers if you're doing some international work. You've got just technology barriers because whoever it is that's making the decisions really isn't that techno savvy.
Well, technology, of course, affects all of us. I'm fortunate enough to have an 88-year-old father, so you can just imagine how our discussions go about trying to communicate and how you retrieve a voicemail, some of those kind of things. So clearly, the broad range of technology is challenging, but It's interesting that what I thought of when you were talking about that, Ron, is so I started with CBRE in 1982. And about 2 years later, they had this newfangled machine called a fax machine. And so it was going to replace paid delivery. Remember in those days, there was no FedEx, there was no UPS. So we were basically like, I don't know, that fax machine, I don't think that's going to really replace the post office. And so for 2 years, we were in a high-rise building in downtown Tampa. We had to run down a flight of interior stairs to the law office in the floor below us because they allowed us to use their fax machine. So in 1982, 83, 84, somewhere in there, there was resistance by the leaders of CBRE, like, we're not going to put fax machine in every office. That's ridiculous. No one's going to do that. And so, we kind of have this pattern of that resistance, if you will. So it's not like we suddenly have a lot of old guys that don't want to use cell phones. It's been sort of resistant because it's generally worked well. We've been able to get it across the line. It's a complex, nuanced business, which means face-to-face, handshake to handshake works. Having said that, I believe the technology sweep is going to be so powerful. It's going to be such a tsunami that it won't be denied. Let me give you a quick example. Any of us can get in our car, drive through a neighborhood, open up Zillow, and literally ride down the street and see what each house is worth, see what it's renting for, et cetera. How long will it be until you can drive through an industrial park or a shopping center or down the main drag in your city, and you're literally looking at the values as you're rolling down the street? And so that's going to be so compelling. It won't matter, how old you are or what language you speak. People are going to want that information, and they're going to find a way to get that information. If it becomes that available and it has stick to it, it has traction to it because people perceive it to be accurate, that magnetic pull will be so strong that some of these other barriers will break down.
Yeah, and that kind of leads right into access to valuation information. We know everything is being, the gig economy, everything's being aggregated, and then the smart techno entrepreneurs are figuring out how to take that aggregated information and then put it in a very easy delivery system, like you say, maybe an app on your phone, where you can look up a building and it'll tell you exactly what amount of square footage is available in that building, or even what the rental rates are. I guess we saw this in the travel agency arena, in maybe even securities brokers side, where a lot easier access changed their model quite a bit, and also reduced the number of people working in that field by quite a bit. I'm not sure if those that are left working in the field are now earning a higher average compensation. I really have no idea. Yeah, I can definitely see how that'd be an impact. Now, we did have a question come in from Nicole, but Nicole, this is more of a technology question as relates to, where do you find out what topics or words have the highest searches online? I think Google Analytics and a few, there's some that, but I don't really, that's not an area that I have any expertise in. I don't know, Blaine, if you have a name or two of anything.
I think there's 2 or 3 that I think it's called, the one that someone was showing me the other day, I think is called something like Buzz Uber or something. It's close to that. Sorry, gang, I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. I can look it up quickly, but it's a simple website. You type in the word and then it simply tells you how many searches. And then the good news is it says this is a high, low, or medium. So if you were trying to just do a very simple, hey, what should I do? But right question, just don't have the answer for the tip of my tongue.
Gotcha. And Katie actually has someone who sent in a question onto their Google form. Katie, you want to read the question?
Yes, this comes from John Thompson, and he'd like to know, should CRE firms work together to produce a platform that rivals Loopnet?
Well, of course, that's been tried, and there was a challenge. The large firms continue to feel frustrated by the monopolistic behavior of Loopnet and CoStar, and so they constantly think in terms of trying to create platforms that would dilute the monopolistic nature of that information. But a couple of things for you to think about there. You will continue to see the evolution of platforms that have that kind of information, subscription information. Now, remember that as an example, when I was at CBRE, one of the things that made us very powerful is we hired our own researchers. And so I like to tell people I was the first person in mankind's history to publish the vacancy report on the West Shore District of Tampa, the West Shore Office District of Tampa, because we funded data researchers and we published the first report. What Loopnet, CoStar do is they begin to aggregate that by the use of interns and researchers, and then they gather it and then they resell it. And that's been a successful platform for them. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to say two things. Number one, you can gather that information yourself. Number two, what I found in its best practices is that the very top producers are in a post-CoStar, post-LoopNet world. And what I mean by that is that their own data is so good and they update it so frequently, they would never revert back to a mass subscription. So I'm sensitive to the question. I think you'll see more people continue to try to build platforms because it's appealing to do that. And it's always attractive when there's a monopolistic situation to see if you can reverse or dilute in some way, but you're not without options.
Great, thank you. You know, as going and, you know, it'd be easy enough for me just to kind of go through some of these other elements of the book, but I think the overriding sense that I got from reading it is, okay, here are the potential disruptors. What we're going to need to adapt to or not, we'll just have to wait and see. But it is coming. It is coming. And so, what is it that really can't be aggregated, or that technology can't really streamline? That is the value add. You know, very probably overused term. For the broker that, we know you have certain barriers of entry. Probably one of the bigger barriers of entry, generally speaking, nationally, is that you have every state has their own real estate commission. They have their own licensing procedure. And you have to be licensed in that state. Also, you have different real estate laws in each state. Some of them are going to be fairly similar, but some are going to be quite different. Louisiana, for instance, is hugely different. Washington State's very different. It's this kind of this barrier to entry. Well, I think we were talking about. Weren't you mentioning that there are a couple of brokerage firms now that are kind of actually allowing people to participate in their platform for some maybe minor compensation? So they can go from being a one state firm to more of a nationally based firm as far as being able to earn commissions?
Yes, I don't particularly address this idea in the book, but yes, there is a firm, as an example, a firm that's maybe 2 years old now that's rising quickly is a firm called Paracel, Parasell. And what they do is they hold licenses in every state. And what they offer as a service is that you can use them as the broker of record in order to work and live in California, but do a deal in Texas, as an example. The real estate laws in every jurisdiction, they are a little bit different. They have different rules. There's no particular incentive for the states to say, hey, why don't we have a national real estate license or National Real Estate Council, because they earn so many fees from licensing and renewals, et cetera, that they're not eager to dismantle that. They do believe that the laws are applicable to their states. And there's some accuracy to that because not all states use the same system of taxation or closing cost processes, or even the way that title transfers. Sure. And so there's not really, I don't feel like there's going to be a lot of grease on that track to say, yeah, we're headed toward a national licensing. So therefore, there are some barriers there that mean that you're going to continue to need to be an expert in your area, et cetera. There are some some sellers primarily, that feel that the agent that they have in their hometown is skilled enough to sell a property in some other town. And so they want to keep that agent at hand and they want the licensing to work for them. They trust this person. They want this person to conduct the transaction or be part of the transaction. So the question becomes, how do we bridge that gap? And so, there's some work at hand there. What I might say to your question of, is it all going to be automated? Is there any value to being specialized? And I would say, yes, of course there is. I remember talking about the book with a group in Phoenix, and one guy finally said, okay, I've had enough. It's not going to be that disruptive. I'm still solid in what I do. And I said, well, what do you do? And he told me about the way that he sells land that is primarily owned by rural and farming type families and entities as the urban area creeps out to these farms and families. And so, those folks that have owned the land for 1, 2, 3, 4 generations, they're not eager to be automated. It's very relationship driven with them, number one. Number two, those sales are always contingent upon the approval of future permits or zoning or rights or shared easements, et cetera, which is complex and complicated. And so in those markets, a lot of times you have to hire the person, the attorney, the planner that has the skills to know what's going on with the jurisdiction boards. In Florida, we live on a limestone sponge. So you got to be able to figure out groundwater. It doesn't, groundwater hasn't chosen to be automated yet. We live on a sponge. So you have to figure all those things out. And so there's a lot of benefit to being able to guide your clients through those very specific, very nuanced and complex places that won't be automated out. And you can find some security there.
Great. Yeah, I've got about 5 or 6 other little categories. I'm just going to kind of go through them one by one, and maybe you can pick out afterwards a couple that you want to comment if you would like.
Okay.
I was trying to make a list of, so what are the things that can't really be replaced, that really are the true value add, and trusted relationships. You already kind of mentioned that, particularly if it's a nuanced area. Negotiating skills, I still think that's got to come in somewhere, I would think. Matching up highest and best use for a tenant to maximize price, whether it's a leasing assignment or a commission to sale. Due diligence, while there's certain aspects of due diligence that are commoditized, there's still local nuances. I mean, I having used Loopnet at some point for a number of years and actually having a chance to drive by some of the properties that were on there, it was kind of like, whoa, this is actually quite different than what the impression that I got on this high traffic count, but so congested, and there's no way you'd be able to get to it from an access perspective. Obviously legal, because although there are, you kind of have the corporate services, and then you have the main street. So corporate services that has the big national platform, they'll probably potentially have relationships with legal firms that also have a national footprint, so they have the ability to get all that information. But I think according to what you said in your book or maybe an interview that I heard, that corporate services only handles about 20% of all real estate, and the rest is kind of main street. So, it's that even many times maybe the legal relationships that you have with other allied professionals that are part of a real estate transaction that sometimes can add as much value or more value. The client can perceive that as you putting them in touch with them actually ends up coming back to you as a reflection of you having more value than if you were just the real estate broker. It's crazy that way, but that's been kind of my experience over time. What might not only be proprietary, but also valuable. Haven't really had an opportunity to delve into what else might be proprietary, because I think, again, kind of going the proprietary route and barrier to entry route is probably, in my view, kind of a losing main theme. You have some owners that are unrealistic. Someone needs to tell them, and help gently, what the market's really saying. I think of how many firms want to go in-house or decide to go in-house because they thought they'd save money, and they'd find out that the in-house people just weren't hungry enough and weren't motivated enough to really make the best decisions for them. So they go back to outside third-party services because they find that they really end up getting more value. Even though it may cost them a little more commission-wise, the end result is just much more beneficial for them. And you could touch on paid for the value add. Maybe there's certain things that get commoditized that maybe we should start thinking about not emphasizing so much and maybe getting paid on value add things. And I know on Loopnet and things like that, or when I'm trying to hire somebody and I go to Indeed, oh my God, the number of people that apply and 95% of them don't qualify. I mean, someone's got to sift through all that stuff. Anyway, those are kind of my kind of general thoughts about where some value add things might be, and didn't know if that kind of, hit any particular nerve or thought that you had in that regard.
Well, as I listened to your list, I think I put a star by negotiating. I want to make a couple of comments about negotiating. First, as many of us on the call know, that it was in response to student demand maybe 15 years ago, where the CCIM students said, hey, this is great. You're showing us how to calculate present value and internal rate of return and before and after tax cash flows, et cetera. Those are great mathematical skills. They're very valuable to us, but we need more help on the soft side. And so at that point, we spent a lot of time and effort to develop the negotiating course, which is now a requirement in order to get your designation. I learned how to, I went through that course a few times, and then I began to teach that course, and I still feel that it is extremely valuable. So I'd say in one perspective, the fact that CCIM is saying, in order to be a designee, we want you to go through a day-long negotiating course. I think that's still absolutely applicable. Paradoxically, what's kind of interesting is that the auction platform is growing rapidly, very, very rapidly in the commercial arena. If you've read the book, you remember that when I read a whole chapter about 10X. I brand it as 10X, but it's really about the commercial auction. 10X is just the largest player in that arena. And I tell this quick story about how this will never work. And then I watched it work right in front of me. Today, not only does 10X continue to expand, but many of the platforms are starting their own auction platform. Cushman & Wakefield, several are starting these auction platforms because it, in effect, automates that process. So if you think about that for a moment, what the seller is saying is, I like the idea that I will know at 4 o'clock on Tuesday what the market value of my property is. So I go through an automated process to put the property onto the platform. Simultaneously, the buyers go through a qualification process. They have to show proof of funds. They have to register. So the two parties come together at auction time, having already submitted to a process. And then when the deal is done, it goes down on an automated contract. And so you could make the case that, wow, that seems almost like anti-negotiation. All you have to do is be the winning bidder and you're done. And all the buyers have the same information. They've looked at the same package. They've all been treated identically, and they all have proof of funds. So it's the sort of purest, rawest form of market value. You remember when we all memorized the definition of market value, no undue stimulus, lots of buyers and sellers, good knowledge, and there it is. Wow, there it is. But there's not a lot of negotiating going on. All you got to do is press a button and be the highest bidder when the clock expires and you win. So it's kind of paradoxical that we are teaching people negotiation and yet the auction platforms are growing. My response to that is that the auction platform works very, very well for certain kinds of real estate. But there are many transactions that go down, as the agents would say, off market, that the seller wants to protect the public image, does not want this to be widely bandied about, cares about price and timing and procedure, but cares about some other things as well. They may want the property to be used in a certain way. They may want to They may not want to receive cash, all cash at once. They may want to spread out those payments. So therefore, it's kind of interesting that we have the growth of the auctions, which seems sort of anti-negotiation. And yet I could make the case that I think negotiation still remains very, very valuable. So we're not going to ultimately automate that out of the system.
Anything else particular that you highlighted, or that was kind of the one that stood out?
Well, there's some art in this business I was thinking about when you were saying sort of highest and best use. So I live in a fast growth area. I live in Orlando. And as an example, if you came to town and you were going to buy land and build a subdivision, the way that it works in a fast growing area is that the municipal leaders are not going to let you begin to build, which is because they hold that building permit card. You're not going to get a building permit unless you have proven and shown to them where the children who are going to live in those houses are going to sit in the schools. In other words, they tie you to the school capacity. And so we do see some places where the developer will build the school because there's not enough capacity in the existing school system. Well, then that becomes interesting. It used to be that they would say, oh, well, we're going to need the first 5 feet for a sidewalk, or, we'd like to put a bus stop there, or, we'd like you to build a pond that we can share with the property next door. Well, those were relatively simple geometric exercises by a civil engineer, right? Not that tough. But when you start trying to negotiate where are children going to sit and in which schools, that becomes a Rubik's Cube. And I haven't seen any two deals that are the same. So in other words, that always is a twisting of, well, how would that work? Oh, well, what we'll do is we'll pay for 10 more standalone buildings to sit out on the football field. And that worked the first time. And then the parents are like, no, I don't want my kid to go to a school where they're in a standalone building. So no more portables. And so that solution worked for about 15 minutes one day. So I think those kinds of the artistic creative side of finding solutions, broad-based nuanced solutions, that's not going to go away.
And back to your local intelligence part of it, I'm part of a kind of a networking group that primarily focuses on market intelligence, and it's kind of a mixture of a number of different real estate professionals, and many of them, what they share is kind of like, we had this amazing site in XYZ municipality. It was going to be a real winner until we were basically told by the municipality that we had 3 different uses that we could use for that, nothing else. And that's not really the highest and best use. And we totally disagree with what they're doing, but that's what you're going to have to do. And 3 years later, after trying to fight out in court and everything, they're still there, not being able to get the piece of property developed the way they wanted to. And they just settled back for what the municipality wanted. And obviously it wasn't a moneymaker for the party that bought it and tried to develop it.
Yeah, I think again, because I'm in a fast growth type of area, every little burg, every little village in Florida wants to have a main street, and they want to have Starbucks, in their little plaza area. And so they have had to turn to the commercial real estate community. And sometimes they have the willingness, they can actually assemble the public will to build in advance, to build the plaza, to build the parking garage, to set the stage for the developer. And then they say, okay, we want you to do this, and we want Starbucks, and we want a waterfront restaurant, and we want this, and we want that. Well, wanting those things is not equal to economic viability. It's so funny how Starbucks won't open if they don't believe they're going to make money in that store. And making money in that store doesn't flow automatically from, oh, there's a parking garage. So there's still a lot of push-pull there and a lot of art. It's been kind of pleasing to me to see how more and more municipally related players are starting to seep into our CCIM courses, because they're starting to realize it's a nuanced question. It doesn't just happen because you want it to happen.
So one of the things I really want to point out, and if you haven't read the book, please read the book. Again, as Blaine pointed out, there aren't answers, particularly in the book. That's more questions. But for those of us that have been around the block as long as I have, usually what's more valuable than an intelligent answer is asking the right question. Even though I may not get the answer to that question, it kind of starts a process. It starts me opening up to where all of a sudden my antenna are attuned to other pieces of information then that I start hearing. and it gives me a better, it gives me a better view. I know one of the things that you, again, ask a lot of questions in the book, and you pose questions for people to ponder. Is there any one or two questions that you'd say, if there was one or two of those questions that someone should really, really at least, focus on if they don't read the book, their takeaway from you as far as a question is concerned? Is there any one question that you might recommend?
I would offer this idea. If you read the book, then you can see how I discuss the nine different predictions. Here's things that I think that might happen. The end of each chapter says, look, I don't know. I think it's something to consider, but if you think this is going to impact you, here's 5, 6, 7 actions you could take. So first of all, the book enables you to choose how you want to react. If you don't care whether Pricewaterhouse buys CBRE, I'm okay with that. But if you do, then here's some things you could think about. If you don't think it's significant in your world that many of the older players might move on, then fine. But if you do, here's some things you can think about. So not only do I create ideas, but I say, well, if you care about this, here's some things you could do. So that's where I end up guiding a lot of people. When people say to me, what do I think is the single biggest, which one is really going to matter the most? Again, that's obviously very specific to the different arenas, if you will. This commercial real estate brokerage arena is played differently. It's played differently in New York City than it is in Miami, than it is in Denver, than it is in El Paso, than it is in Gainesville, Florida, 100 miles north of Orlando. So it's hard to say which one would be the most significant. But I think there's two that seem to be really kind of forging ahead. The first one we've already touched on. The last portion of the book is this juxtaposition of the new guys and the old guys, how the old guys see it as they leave and how the new guys see it as they're coming in and look at a wide range of opportunities. And so that continues to be very interesting to watch. My quick anecdote there is I probably have been invited to 15 presentations by young capitalists that want me to consider investing in their platform, or what do I think of this platform? Can I watch their pitch? And they're desperately trying to explain to me what problem they're solving. And so you can feel, it was prior to the last couple of years, that was 0. And now over the last year, I've watched 15 pitches and we're thinking through some of those things. The second one that I would say that's going to be really interesting to watch, because you can see it in Reonomy now. For those of you who use Reonomy, you can call up the data card. And so you can see that John Smith owns Valencia Plaza, and you can see some data there. You probably can see whether there's loan data there, but there's a little index over there which says probability of sale. So what Reonomy has done, which I talk about in the book, is just imagine if you had sold 20 properties a year for the last 10 years and you had managed to keep maybe 20 data points on each one of those sales. Who was the buyer? Who was the seller? How long had the seller owned the property? How old was the property? Had there been a capital improvement? Was it in a fast changing area, slow changing area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, what's happening is they're building algorithms now that say, if a property has these algorithms, there's a greater than average chance that it's going to sell. We all live in algorithms every day. Every time you watch something from Netflix, you're just still looking at the last screen and going, wow. And before you can think, it's like countdown, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. The next series is going to start that they've picked out for you. So what's going to be really, really interesting is the ability to develop meaningful algorithms. I have this kind of dream that Ron Rates is going to get a call and it's going to say, oh, yeah, hey, Mr. Rates, John Smith here with ABC Realty. Listen, I know you own Valencia Plaza, and just be interested in what your plans are for that property. And you're going, why are you calling me? I've already had like 8 of these calls. And finally, someone says to you, well, Reonomy has you at an 83% chance of selling this year. And so because you meet all the criteria. So then it's going to be like, well, Ron, you can't not sell because then you break the algorithm. You wouldn't want that, would you? And if you do sell, then you just reinforce the algorithm. And so it's just going to be really fun and interesting to watch how this ability to start sifting data and looking for that algorithm. What are the factors that foretell the sale? If you dig into the book and some of the related literature there, you can see that some people are actually starting to think about things like, let's look at data that's never been looked at before. How much of this real estate has additional capacity that we could get more square footage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the market will comb out those inefficiencies. So the properties that are most likely to sell are the ones that are not at full capacity, not using full capacity. So they're doing it based on aerial photo. They are deconstructing aerial photos and go, oh, we could get like 10,000 more feet on this property. And there's the market trying to comb out that inefficiency. So that's going to be interesting to see to what degree it can be predictive.
Well, again, the book is Adapt. Please, if you did receive and had a chance to read it, please do. If you haven't received it, please order a copy. I would highly recommend it. I really enjoyed reading it. And kind of the takeaway for me was disruption really is about finding what elements of those might impact me and how I can kind of reshape what I'm doing right now to at least be in a position to adapt when that seems wise. So as opposed to being, I didn't see that coming, oh my God, you already kind of have a sense of, okay, this was something that I knew was a possibility and kind of prepared for it. If there were any blocks in our system, they're not there anymore. So we can move that direction. And while it may be a whole new way, for me, it's more of taking what the core of what's already here and making some adaptive changes to what's happening in the marketplace. And change is happening fast. It's happening very, very fast. So Blaine, you are working on some other things too. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? I know Katie maybe has a screen share to also use.
Yeah, thank you. I continue to think about reinventing myself constantly. If you are in the commercial real estate business, as long as I am, you're going to get to reinvent yourself voluntarily or involuntarily along the way 2 or 3 times. And so one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about lately is that very few commercial real estate practitioners really take advantage of coaching. All of the top producers do, and you can't be in the commercial real estate arena without having been exposed or rubbed up against the Massimo Group, which does a very, very good job of coaching people on a one-on-one basis. It's not cheap, but it's good and it's powerful. And if you can afford it, you should do it. What I try to think about is how can I democratize coaching, given especially that I'm a one-man show. So I came up with this coaching platform called One More Deal. The value proposition is what would one more deal per year be worth to you? So if you knew you were going to make another 10,000 or 20 or 50, whatever your average deal is, what could you do to launch yourself in that direction? And then my answer to that question is subscribe to a membership platform month by month, cancel at any time, that contains information that's extremely applicable. So the idea here is that if you join, then you are exposed to content of various kinds that will constantly be expanding. I don't want to say it's the Netflix of coaching because it's not. There is very valuable information in there. There will continue to be. And so it's been extremely exciting for me to get this launched on March 15th after about 8 months of work. We tested it in a Kickstarter campaign. So we had several dozen people pledge money. And so that was very valuable, making me think that people want it. What I continue to find, though, is that not everybody wants it. Not everybody's willing to pay for it. But the ones who do want it don't have that many options. So this is my attempt to add, my hat to that ring and see if we could make it available. I thank you, Katie, for putting it up on the screen. It's just onemoredeal.net. I just pushed that into the chat box as well. But would love to have you look at it, see what you think. If you have questions, you certainly can find me. You'll find me. It's easy to find me on my own personal website, hbs-resources.com. And thank you, of course, for supporting the books. If you want to participate in the ongoing conversation that I'm trying to drive through this publishing of Adapt, if you go to the website, there's a blog there, and you can see that I, from time to time, post out articles that post ideas that come up that support some of the ideas in in the book. And
So to
so
that end, Blaine, one thing I want to point out I didn't mention is that besides the questions that Blaine has you ponder, he also lists the resources, the things you should look at, be able to track, that will probably give you more information about what's going on. So I think the blog would be a good place for to see what Blaine is really tracking, because I assume you're going to be tracking the things that you mentioned in the book.
yeah, so that's what the blog, that really the purpose of the blog is, just to, if you're interested in this conversation, hey, here's something that popped up. I'm sort of the watcher of the traffic in terms of, hey, this is related to the topic. You might find this of interest.
Excellent. Well, Blaine, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed our interaction. I know the chapter appreciates your words today, and I will thank you. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to our chapter president, Ryan.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Blaine. Really appreciate that. It was very informative. I've got a bunch of takeaways from that was fantastic. Thank you to our sponsors, and as a big thank you to our programs chair people, Katie Sintel, Alan Joel, Clara Fischel, and then of course Amy Norton, our chapter administrator. You've all done a fantastic job. Don't forget that we have a CI 102 class coming up May 3rd through the 6th. And then our next chapter meeting will be May 13th at the Works. It will be an in-person chapter meeting. So we'll be doing a tour, which is going to be great to get back together together again, which is going to be wonderful. Thank you, Georgia chapter, for joining us today. And we appreciate you, and have a great rest of the week. Everybody take care.
Thank you.